My son had just married the woman he called the love of his life. I stood smiling with a champagne glass, believing the hardest years of raising him alone had finally been worth it. Then my new daughter-in-law took the microphone, looked straight at me, and said, "The best wedding gift you could give us is leaving this family permanently." The ballroom erupted with nervous laughter. My son didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. I quietly set down my glass, walked outside, and made one phone call. 15 minutes later, every smile inside that reception completely disappeared forever. My name is Margaret Bennett, and I'm 62 years old. People often assume my story begins at my son's wedding reception, the moment my new daughter-in-law humiliated me in front of 200 guests. They're wrong. It began 20 years earlier, the day I buried my husband. When Michael died unexpectedly from a heart condition, Daniel was only 12. Overnight, I became a grieving widow, a single mother, and the sole person responsible for protecting everything my husband and I had built together. There wasn't time to fall apart. I threw myself into work, expanding the small investment firm Michael and I had started from our garage into one of the region's most respected private financial companies. I spent long nights studying markets after Daniel went to bed, attended client meetings while pretending I wasn't exhausted, and never allowed my son to feel the weight I carried every single day. Money was never my goal. Security was. I wanted Daniel to grow up believing he could chase any dream without worrying about whether the lights would stay on or whether tuition checks would clear. Thankfully, he became exactly the kind of young man every parent hopes to raise.
Kind, honest,
hardworking. At least, that's what I believed. Then, he met Vanessa. She was beautiful, intelligent, polished, and always knew exactly what to say in public. Everyone admired her confidence. I did too, at first. When Daniel introduced her to me, she hugged me warmly and called me Mom before dessert arrived. She complimented my home, laughed at my stories, and insisted she couldn't wait to become part of our family. I believed every word. When they became engaged, I quietly offered to pay for the wedding. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted them to begin married life without financial pressure. I covered the ballroom, the flowers, the live orchestra, the catering, even their honeymoon. Asked for only one thing. Make the day about the two of you. I told them. No one needs to know who paid for anything. Vanessa smiled sweetly. That's incredibly generous. Looking back, I wonder whether that smile was gratitude or relief. As the months passed, little things began changing. Whenever we met with vendors, Vanessa corrected my opinions before I'd finished speaking. She suggested I wear something less noticeable because she wanted a modern wedding aesthetic. Family dinners became uncomfortable. If I shared a memory from Daniel's childhood, Vanessa quickly changed the subject. If Daniel and I laughed together, she'd interrupt with another conversation. She never openly insulted me. She simply made me feel like an unwanted guest standing inside my own family. Whenever Daniel noticed the tension, he'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "She's just overwhelmed with planning, Mom. After the wedding, everything will settle down." I wanted to believe him, so I ignored every warning sign. The wedding day finally arrived. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Daniel looked happier than I'd ever seen him. Watching him exchange vows, I told myself every sacrifice had been worth it. Then the reception began. The first surprise came when I discovered my reserved front row table had disappeared. Instead, my name had been moved to a table near the back beside distant acquaintances I'd never met. The coordinator quietly apologized and said there had been last-minute adjustments. Later, the photographer gathered both families for formal portraits. I waited. Everyone else was called forward. Vanessa's parents, her grandparents, her cousins, even family friends. No one invited me. I stood alone, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while guests glanced toward me with confused expressions. Daniel noticed. For a moment, our eyes met across the ballroom. He looked uncomfortable. Then Vanessa touched his arm, whispered something into his ear, and he stayed exactly where he was. A few minutes later, the orchestra stopped playing. Vanessa accepted a wireless microphone, lifted her champagne glass, smiled brightly toward the crowd, and then turned directly toward me. Vanessa lifted her champagne glass a little higher and smiled as if she were about to deliver the sweetest toast of the evening. "I just want to thank everyone for celebrating with us," she began. "This day has been absolutely perfect." The guests applauded. She glanced toward Daniel, who smiled proudly beside her. Then she slowly turned toward me. "And before we continue," she said, "I'd like to thank my wonderful mother-in-law." A few people looked at me and smiled politely. Vanessa paused for dramatic effect. "You've already given us a beautiful wedding." She laughed softly. "But honestly, the best wedding gift you could ever give us would be leaving this family for good." The room froze. A few nervous laughs escaped from different tables, as though people weren't sure whether they'd just heard a joke. Others stared at me in disbelief. I looked at Daniel. He didn't laugh. He didn't object. He simply lowered his eyes and stood silently beside his new wife. That silence hurt more than Vanessa's words ever could. For a brief moment, I wondered if I should defend myself, explain everything I'd sacrificed, remind everyone that I'd paid for nearly every detail surrounding them. But I realized something important. People who choose to humiliate you in public rarely care about hearing your side of the story. So I smiled. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I refused to let humiliation become entertainment. I gently placed my champagne glass on the nearest table. "Congratulations," I said calmly. "I truly hope your marriage brings you both happiness." The ballroom became even quieter. No yelling, no tears, no accusations. I simply walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard whispers growing louder with every step. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my face. For the first time all day, I could breathe. I stood beneath the entrance canopy, looked back once at the ballroom windows glowing with music and celebration, then reached into my purse for my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. Richard Coleman. He answered before the second ring. "Margaret, I need you." His voice immediately changed. "Tell me where you are." "Still at the reception." There was a brief pause. "What happened?" "My new daughter-in-law just informed 200 guests that the greatest wedding gift I could give them would be disappearing from the family." Richard exhaled slowly. "I was afraid something like this might happen." So was I. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Richard had served as chairman of the Bennett Family Foundation for nearly 18 years. More importantly, he had been Michael's closest friend. When my husband died, Richard helped me protect everything we had built. He knew every investment, every trust, every legal document, every promise Michael and I had made about Daniel's future. 6 months earlier, Richard and I had finalized the first phase of my estate plan. Nearly everything I owned, the investment company, the family estate, several commercial properties, charitable foundation leadership, and long-term investment holdings, was scheduled to transfer gradually to Daniel over the coming years. Not because he was entitled to them, because I believed he had earned that responsibility. The final documents were scheduled to become effective the following week. "Richard," I said quietly, "have any of the transfers become irrevocable?"
No.
"So, everything can still be changed?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. I don't want to act out of anger. I know, but tonight showed me something I can't ignore. Richard didn't interrupt. For months I convinced myself Vanessa simply needed time. I ignored every insult because I wanted peace. But my son stood there while his wife publicly humiliated me. My voice cracked for the first time. He didn't say one word. Richard spoke gently. "Sometimes silence tells us more than speeches ever could." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I think it's time every decision reflects today's reality instead of yesterday's hopes." "I understand." I took a slow breath. "Please bring every estate document, every trust amendment, and every succession file." "To the reception?" "Yes. I'll also bring our senior estate attorneys." "Thank you. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. Inside the ballroom, the music had started again, but it sounded different now. Guests kept glancing toward the entrance, wondering why I hadn't returned. Exactly 15 minutes later, 3 black SUVs rolled quietly into the circular driveway. Richard stepped out carrying 2 locked leather portfolios. Behind him walked 2 attorneys I had trusted for years. They entered the ballroom beside me. Richard looked directly into my eyes and asked one simple question. "Margaret, would you like me to proceed exactly as you instructed?" I looked at Richard and nodded. Yes. Without another word, we walked back into the ballroom together. The orchestra stopped almost immediately. Every conversation faded into silence. Guests turned toward the entrance as Richard and the 2 attorneys followed me across the polished dance floor, each carrying leather portfolios. Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. Daniel looked from me to Richard with obvious confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. I stopped a few feet away from the head table. "I promised myself this evening would always be about celebrating your marriage," I said calmly. I had no intention of speaking tonight. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for another drink. But your wife decided to make me part of the entertainment. Vanessa forced a nervous laugh. It was only a joke. I looked at her. A joke is funny when everyone laughs. No one in the ballroom did. Richard stepped forward. "Good evening," he said politely. "My name is Richard Coleman. I serve as chairman of the Bennett Family Foundation and as legal trustee for the Bennett family estate." The guests exchanged puzzled looks. Vanessa folded her arms. "I'm not sure why lawyers are crashing our wedding. They're here because Mrs. Bennett requested our presence." Richard carefully placed one portfolio on a nearby table and opened it. For several years, Mrs. Bennett has been preparing a long-term succession plan involving her private investment company, charitable foundation, family properties, and other business interests. Daniel frowned. "Mom, I didn't know any of this." "You weren't supposed to," I replied. "I never wanted money to influence our relationship." Richard continued. "The transfer of these responsibilities was scheduled to begin next week. However, every document remains fully under Mrs. Bennett's authority." He paused before speaking again. "Nothing has become legally final." The room became perfectly still. Vanessa's expression changed. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying," Richard answered evenly, "that Mrs. Bennett has instructed us to suspend every pending transfer until further review." Several guests quietly whispered. Daniel stared at me. "You were leaving everything to me?" "I was trusting you with responsibility," I corrected gently. "There is a difference." He looked completely overwhelmed. "I never asked for any of this." "No," I agreed. "But I expected something much smaller." He swallowed. "What?" "For my son to stand beside me when I was publicly humiliated." His shoulders dropped. I froze. "I know. I didn't know what to do." "You always know what to do when someone is treated unfairly, Daniel. I taught you that when you were 6 years old." He couldn't answer. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." She laughed nervously. "Everyone knows I was teasing. You're seriously changing legal documents over one harmless speech." I shook my head.
No.
"I'm changing them because your speech revealed something far more important." She frowned.
What?
"Character." I looked around the ballroom. For months I ignored disrespect because I wanted peace. Tonight showed me that silence can encourage cruelty. Richard closed the portfolio. "No assets are being taken away tonight," he explained. "Mrs. Bennett has simply chosen to pause decisions until trust can be evaluated carefully." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. I should have stopped at the moment she started talking. "Yes," I answered softly. "You should have." He walked toward me. "I can't undo tonight."
No.
"But you can decide what kind of husband and what kind of son you'll become tomorrow." For the first time all evening, he hugged me. Not because of documents, not because of money, because he finally understood what he had failed to protect. I hugged him back. Then I stepped away. I faced the guests. "I sincerely wish the newlyweds a happy marriage." I smiled politely. "My hope is that they build a home where respect is given freely, because without respect, no family, regardless of wealth, can truly succeed." I thanked everyone for attending and quietly left the ballroom. 6 months later, Daniel knocked on my front door carrying nothing but homemade soup and a handwritten letter. No requests. No discussions about inheritance. Only an apology. That visit became another. Then another. Slowly, he rebuilt what his silence had broken. Nearly a year later, I updated part of my estate plan, not because I had forgotten that wedding night, but because I had witnessed genuine change. People often believe the greatest family gift is money. They're wrong. The greatest gift is raising someone who understands that love without respect eventually becomes empty, but respect, once earned again through humility and consistent actions, can rebuild even the deepest broken relationships.